Hello everyone, this is Showtime 112. When MiG-25 first arrived to the Middle East, it was not even properly operational. In early 1971, Egypt and Israel were in a non-defined state between peace and open war. Heavy fighting of the so-called War of Attrition had ended in the summer of 1970, but Israel was still in control of the Sinai Peninsula, which Egypt wanted back, and Israeli aircraft were frequently entering Egyptian airspace in order to monitor SAM sites and new air bases. Another war seemed inevitable, and Soviet Union was keen to support their Arab allies. This included the deployment of a small number of their brand new MiG-25s. The interceptor version, MiG-25P, was estimated to be of little value in a theater in which combat was mostly fought on low to medium level, so instead, Soviets sent the reconnaissance version. 4 airframes were chosen, including 2 pure recon airplanes, MiG-25R, and 2 bomb-carrying MiG-25RB. Their ability to safely gather information about Israeli positions was exceptionally valuable, as they were able to take photos from altitudes up to 22,000 meters, or about 72,000 feet. Israelis had almost no chance of intercepting the Soviet aircraft with their current equipment. The Soviet MiG-25s were deployed to Cairo West Air Base in March 1971. The unit was designated as the 63rd Independent Guards Reconnaissance Aviation Squadron. Although the airplanes carried Egyptian markings, no Egyptians were allowed anywhere near the MiG-25s. MiG-25s initially flew training and calibration flights in Egyptian airspace, but in October 1971, they flew their first mission near Israeli-controlled territory. The route went along the Israeli and Sinai coast and then across the Suez. Foxbat recon missions continued every 2 weeks, and their routes went over the Sinai Peninsula and eventually over Israel itself. Their missions were highly successful as they produced accurate photos of Israeli positions and assets. These flights caused great frustration to the Israelis, as they were unable to stop them. It wasn't for a lack of trying, though. The only Israeli asset which in theory could reach the high-flying MiG-25s was the F-4E Phantom, and every flight was met by an attempted intercept. However, to be successful, the intercepts needed to be precisely guided by the ground control. In most cases, Phantom pilots would only briefly glance at the Foxbats without locking them up or launching their Sparrows. The only case when a Sparrow was launched at a MiG-25 occurred on 16 May 1972. 4 Phantoms from Refidim and Ophir were launched. The first pair was unable to get in a launch position as the MiGs zoomed higher, but a Phantom from the second pair locked one of the MiGs up and launched a Sparrow missile. Sources give slightly different stories. In the first version, a Sparrow was launched from head-on aspect, and it passed within the lethal radius without exploding. The other version says that the motor burned out, the missile failed to self-detonate, and it even landed on the western side of the Suez Canal almost intact, and was recovered by Egypt and given to the Soviets. Despite the success of the MiG-25's involvement in Egypt, the relations between the Soviets and Egyptians began to sour. Egyptian request to purchase their own MiG-25s was refused. Finally, President Sadat expelled all the Soviet military personnel in July 1972, thus temporarily ending the Foxbats' presence in this part of the world. MiG-25s returned to Egypt during the October 1973 war, but only flew 2 sorties before the war's end. They remained in Egypt until late 1974. In late 1970s, hostilities between Israel and Egypt ended, and Israel's main opponent was Syria. The country attempted to purchase MiG-25 from the Soviets, but they kept refusing them for years until they finally changed their minds in 1977. The first examples were delivered in 1979, and the first unit operating the fighter variant became operational in early 1981. At the peak, Syria operated 16 PD fighter versions and 8 RB reconnaissance versions of the MiG-25. The Syrian expectations were high, and even the Israelis were unsure how their F-15s would do in a fight against the Foxbat. The first encounter between the two types occurred on 13 February 1981. As we have already covered this topic on the channel, we will not go into details now and you can watch the earlier video. Spoiler alert, Israeli pilot Benny Zinker launched 3 of his Sparrow missiles on a Syrian MiG-25 over Lebanon and succeeded in shooting it down. The Foxbat was no longer untouchable, although this was the fighter version. Recon version, on the other hand, was still able to fly high over Lebanon without any trouble. F-15 and MiG-25 would again clash 5 months later, on 29 July 1981. A fragile ceasefire between Israel and Syria was arranged, but Israel still continued its recon flights over Lebanon. Syrians attempted to set up an ambush. The plan was devised by one of their best MiG-25 pilots, Ahmad al-Mehyar. 2 MiG-21s would act as the bait and try to drag Israeli F-15s in front of the 2 low-flying MiG-25s, flown by Mehyar and another highly experienced pilot. Foxbats would then attack from 2 opposite sides. The 4 Syrian aircraft took off, and ground control vectored them at a pair of F-15s from number 133 Squadron. But the Syrian plan didn't go as expected. Instead of Israelis detecting the 2 MiG-21s and engaging them, the northern MiG-25 approached them before this happened. The Syrian ground control ordered their pilot to attack, but the Eagles descended to a lower altitude, making it impossible for the MiG-25 pilot to lock them up and launch his R-40 missiles, as the airplane had no look-down shoot-down capability. The MiG was rushing at the speed of 950 knots, and it approached to only 6 miles, or less than 10 kilometers, when the lead F-15 pilot, Shaul Simon, launched an AIM-7F. The missile hit the MiG's underside and the airplane crashed. Only then the Israelis detected the 2 MiG-21s, which turned east and attempted to drag the F-15s with them. At that point, the other Foxbat, flown by Ahmad al-Mehyar, approached to within 20 miles of the Eagles, powered up his radar and fired 2 R-40s. At about the same time, the Israelis gave up on the chase and turned south. They detected missile launches and went defensive. Here, the story begins to differ. Israeli version says that their pilots successfully evaded the R-40s and then went on to attack the lone MiG-25. Simon and his wingman, Amir Grenfeld, fired a Sparrow each. One of the missiles detonated behind the target and the other failed to lock. Mehyar successfully escaped to Syria, and Israeli pilots were told to disengage. Syrian version, on the other hand, claims that Mehyar achieved the hit and that one of the Israeli F-15s was shot down. The 2 encounters showed that MiG-25 was no match for the F-15 as a fighter. But the reconnaissance version was still untouchable, and it kept flying missions over Lebanon at 70,000 feet. Israelis then came up with a plan which included Hawk surface-to-air missile system. They would bring a Hawk battery on high ground in Lebanon and so close the gap needed to reach the high-flying MiGs, normally outside of its engagement zone. Ambush was set, and on 12th of August 1982, battery search radar detected a MiG-25 on approach to Beirut, but no lock was achieved. A technician then noticed that the improved Hawk system was optimized for high and slow or low and fast targets, and that was probably the problem. An override was installed and another chance came on August 31st. This time, lock was successful and 2 missiles were launched. They failed to achieve direct hits, but they caused enough damage for the MiG to come to lower altitude. This brought it into the engagement range of an F-15, flown by Captain Shaul Schwartz. Schwartz launched a single-aim 7F, which achieved a hit. This was his third kill, but it was shared between him and the Hawk battery. Syrians continued with MiG-25 operations over Lebanon, and Israelis achieved no further kills. MiG-25 saw some limited action during the Syrian civil war, but very few details are available. The type also saw some action in Libyan service and a lot more in Iraqi, but those are stories for other videos. There's one more thing I'd like to discuss. Trustmaster is giving me a commission for every purchase in their web shop to which my creator code is applied. I have decided to give away the commission to you, the viewers. You can't get the discount directly in the web shop, but if you contact me, I will pay you the commission amount to your PayPal account. It's mostly between 3 and 7%. Check the video description for details, whether it's for flight sims or other. Thank you for your time and keep watching Showtime 112.